Tell me, is there anything that lifts your mood quite like a good haircut? Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today we're doing the end of the year book tag, but before we get into that, let's answer that question. Is there anything better than a good haircut to lift your mood? Well, haircut is great, and yes, I did have one just this morning and my hair feels very refreshed, but I believe the second best thing is getting a new bookcase, which is what you see behind me. If you've been on this channel, you will have been used to seeing in this spot, we are in my living room, my wooden desk with a couple of pieces of art hanging above it. They were drawn, by the way, by my niece. I'm not sure if I've ever mentioned that. I am very proud of those two pieces and I am definitely keeping them. I just need to hang them elsewhere. But as of this last weekend, I have this new bookshelf behind me, which my teenage son very kindly built for me. So if you've been on this channel, you know that I'm very particular about this concept of owning loads and loads of books because, for one, I'm a huge library fan and 70% of books I read are from the library. And also I tend to rotate a lot of books. So if I've bought some from a second-hand bookstore, which here in the UK are most of the time charity stores, then I will hand them back to the charity store once I finished reading them, just so that I can keep rotating them and so that other people can enjoy them as well. But having started reading more and more classics, I find it a little bit more difficult to part with classic books. So I had to make a decision whether I make another space in my house for another bookshelf. This is on top of my bookshelf that lives in my office. There are just 5 not very long shelves. And so I've come to the conclusion that yes, I would love to keep the few classics that I have for now, just in case I want to reread them. It is not very often that I reread contemporary fiction, but with classics, I do see myself rereading those. And I am very happy about this bookcase. It's black, so it offers a bit of an accent in my otherwise very white and neutral living room. It's not real wood, by the way. I'll link the bookcase below. It's very, very cheap, and my son tells me that it was fairly easy to put together in case you're interested. And I'm very excited because, as you can see, I have loads of space to fill with books. Obviously now that space is taken by a few decorative items, but I'm pretty sure all of these shelves will be filled with books sooner or later. And that's it. I'm not buying any more bookcases. This is my pledge. This is it. Once I fill these up, then I need to really start rotating more books. But yes, I had a haircut as well. So overall, I'm having a great few days. And I wanted to do this book tag, which I can see that quite a few booktubers are doing. It really helps to zoom out a little bit and have that bird's eye view. But also, I love watching these videos because you have such a wide variety of different books that others are talking about. Books that maybe specifically have stood out for them. And also it's interesting to see other people's reading plans. So let's jump into the questions. Are there any books you started to read this year that you need to finish? Well, this will come as no surprise because my biggest challenge is to finish War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy before the end of December. I am towards the end. I'm on page 987. There are about 1,300 pages. So here you can see this is where my bookmark is. So I don't have that much to go and I have high hopes for finishing it this year. And I have been vlogging my experience and I will post this once I have finished the whole book. I started this in January and I had a totally false start because, silly me, assumed that I could just start reading it while I was was in the hospital waiting for my husband's treatment to be finished. So I knew I would be in the hospital for about a couple of hours, and I thought, great, I'm just gonna get right on it and I'll take this big book with me and I'll start reading and I'll make great progress while waiting in the hospital. Well, that plan failed completely because I couldn't focus, obviously, with different people walking by. Also thinking a little bit about my husband's procedure, which wasn't anything serious, but for this book you have to be 100% focused and you have to be reading it in a peace and quiet. So then I don't think I started it until March, but it wasn't until May that I properly got into the groove, shall I say, and into a proper routine of reading sections of it regularly. And after about 100 pages, I also combined reading it with listening to it on Audible, and that has been working for me very, very well. So once I got used to all the names and I was properly set into the story, combining the Audible with the paper copy worked fantastically well. But more details on this in my vlog. So that's the one book that I want to finish before the end of December. Obviously I have quite a few other books on the go, but I, with those, don't have the pressure of finishing them by a certain time. They just my, regular books. If I don't enjoy something, I put it away. I'm not studying literature, I'm not reading for my job, I'm not writing a book, so it's not like I need to be hard on myself. And I also do want to very much reading to continue to be this joyful exercise, this joyful experience for me. So no pressure other than this one. I would love to go into 2026 and be able to say I have read War and Peace, and I have finished it. Second question, do you have an autumnal book to transition into the end of the year? So I have already read Thomas Hardy, I've already read Joseph Conrad, and also Stoner by John Williams, which were the three books that I definitely wanted to read in autumn. And currently I feel like reading some good mystery. And in one of my videos when I was talking about my autumn TBR, I thought it would be contemporary mystery, but actually I think I want to read a classic. I did mention the Moonstone by Wilkie Collins in the same video on my autumn TBR, and that is a very high contender. However, I have read loads of English literature recently, so I feel like maybe reading something in translation. And I have this Japanese classic murder mystery from 1960s by Yoko Mizo. The title is The Honjin Murders. So I might reach for this one, but I'm not sure yet. We'll see where the mood takes me. I will obviously also reading a historical fiction novel which is titled The Widow Queen. I talked about it in one of my videos. In terms of transitioning into the winter season, I have been eyeing up Jane Eyre. I know it's a bit of a cliche because Jane Eyre is such a staple autumnal / wintry classic. And for me personally, I actually wasn't planning on reading that book this year, but it has been really calling out to me. Actually, I have it here on the higher shelf with all of my Penguin classics. So that's definitely high on the list. Next question is there a new release you're still waiting for? The answer is no. No, because I am completely useless when it comes to tracking new releases. I have such a huge TBR filled with books that have already been published, lots of them classics, they were published years and years ago, that I don't feel like I am drawn to the latest hits. It also comes from the fact that I like to wait for other people to read it and test it out. So yeah, I don't have that sort of urge to track new releases. However, as I'm filming this, just this week the Booker Prize winner was announced, and the book from the Booker's shortlist that is very high on my list of books to read is The Land of Winter. I am super intrigued by that book because it's dealing with some kind of aftermath of WW2. This is set in 1960s in England, and as someone who has grown up living with a couple of adults who were WW2 survivors, and also with another family member who was my grandmother's sister who was living next door, all of them survivors in very, very different ways, I am fascinated by this subject. It's not an upcoming release, but it's one of the newest books that I'm interested in. And also recently I popped into an independent local bookstore and I heard the shopkeeper talking to two ladies next to me about these two books. One is The Correspondent by Virginia Evans, which I have just literally picked up from the library. The main protagonist here is 73-year-old woman, which I love because having just finished Drive the Plow Over the Bones of the Dead with over 60-year-old woman, I think we should have more books with older women as main protagonists. And also the great thing about this book is that this is in epistolary form, so it's written in form of letters. There's something about letters that especially feel autumnal to me. I actually did have very high on my list to read 84 Charing Cross Road, but I have a copy of that. I will read this one first because this is library copy, so I'll have to return it in 3 weeks, whereas 84 Charing Cross Road I can read anytime. So in terms of new releases, this shopkeeper was telling these two ladies that this is a fantastic book. And another book which I don't have yet, I have reserved it at the library, which she said she read in one day, is When the Cranes Fly South by a Swedish author, Lisa Ridzen. This is supposed to be a very gentle novel about an elderly man who just wants to live a quiet life, but as he is getting older, he is challenged by his family to give up his beloved dog. That's all I know. That's all I need to know. Like I said, the shopkeeper claimed she read this in one day. She couldn't put it down, and I will trust her on that. So as soon as I get it from the library, I shall read that and let you know whether it is really such a gripping read. On to the next question. What are the 3 books you want to read before the end of the year? I have more than 3 books that I want to read before the end of the year. Let's see how many of them I will actually manage to read. But I don't know if you've watched my videos on my TBR for 2025, which I would have posted in January. I had 3 videos on classics, fiction and non-fiction. And in classics and fiction, I had 5 top titles that I definitely wanted to read this year, and then maybe 10 or 15 other titles that were kind of more of a guide. I'm very much a mood reader, so I'll just allow myself to reach for a book that I feel like reading. But there were, like I said, 5 titles that I definitely wanted to cover. When it comes to classics, I'm happy to say that actually I have read most of them except for one that was left on that list, and that's Madame Bovary by Gustave Flaubert, which I will definitely read before the end of the year. I have started it. I am about 60 pages in. It's not a massive book and I'm quite liking it, especially at this time of the year. I feel like it's very suitable for autumn because I can sense already there's a lot of drama coming my way. And same with top 5 for fiction. I've already mentioned the historical fiction that I'll be reading, The Widow Queen. That was in my 5 top books to read. And by the way, I'll be reading it in its original Polish language in this Polish edition, which looks like this, and title is a little bit different. It's called Harda, which has got nothing to do with The Widow Queen, but I think this would be impossible to translate What would it? Harda, it's a very old-fashioned word in the Polish language that means tough, as in resilient. So yeah, maybe not impossible to translate, but I think The Widow Queen is probably okay because the main protagonist is a queen that became a widow. Anyway, I'm digressing. Let's move on. And the final book within my list of the top 5 fiction books I wanted to read this year was this one by Ya Gyasi, Transcendent Kingdom. I have it in this beautiful hardcover. However, I have since picked up by Ya Gyasi in my local secondhand bookstore, Homegoing. So now I have this dilemma. Do I read this one or do I read this one first? Let me know if you've read either of them or both of them and which one you would recommend I start first. When it comes to classics, I forgot to mention Jane Austen. Even though this wasn't part of my top 5, I have decided that it will be my December tradition to read one Austen book because last year I had a great experience of reading Pride and Prejudice just before Christmas and right after 1984, and I can tell you that reading Pride and Prejudice after I finished 1984 saved my mood. I don't know why I decided to read 1984 just before Christmas. That was a really depressing read. Very important book, but yeah, maybe don't read it before Christmas. And so after that, I've read Pride and Prejudice and I loved it so much, so enjoyable. So I just thought, okay, every year around Christmas, I'm just gonna read Jane Austen. I know lots of people read Jane Austen in the summer, but I'm doing it differently. I'm gonna do it in December. And I had in my mind that I would read Emma, which I have. Oh, there it is. In the edition that I really, really like, Penguin English Library edition. I find these books so comfortable to read. However, around the summertime, I randomly borrowed from a local library, Northanger Abbey, just because it was sitting there on the shelf. And I didn't finish it at the time. I did start it, I didn't finish it. But when I started it, I thought that was a really funny and strong beginning to that novel. So I might read Northanger Abbey instead of Emma. Or maybe I'll read both. We'll see how much time I have around Christmas. Next question is, what trends have you noticed in your reading this year? I'm definitely reading more classics. I have fallen in love with classics all over again, and I think as you read more classics, you end up craving them, don't you? Another big trend for me this year in my reading has been that I have been reading very little non-fiction. At the start of the year, I had these great plans for all these books that I was going to read. I don't think I've read any of the non-fiction books that I have set out myself to read. I mean, last month, or was it the previous month, I did read non-fiction, which was The Secret Painter, and I enjoyed it a lot. And I have a couple of non-fiction books listed as sort of a non-fiction priority, which I might pick up this year, but somehow non-fiction really slipped down to the bottom of my priorities. I do, however, enjoy a good, solid memoir, and the 2 titles that I have on my mind to read this year are memoirs. But, you know, it's okay. And if I don't feel like reading non-fiction, then I'm not going to read non-fiction. I'm sure it's gonna come around again. You go through these sort of phases, don't you? And one final trend that I am quite set on is to read more big books and specifically sagas. I am not a super huge fan of short stories and even novellas. I mean, with some of them, yes, despite the short form, they can still be quite poignant, but there's something about getting into a big fat book and getting inside the psyche of the characters and seeing their struggles through decades. There's something about that that is like a whole transformative experience in itself. So will that mean that I'll be reading less books because they will be in a longer form? Yes. Do I care about the number of the books I read? No. So if you also are a fan fan of big books that are real page turners and are all about different generations and deep historical and geographical context and family drama, then please continue to watch this channel. You won't be disappointed. Okay, one before last question, number 6 is, how do you feel about your reading goals? Anything you want to change, adjust, or abandon? I feel like I've just covered that in my previous question. I don't ever set myself any numerical goals. I don't know, maybe it works for some people. For me, I just really don't see the point of numerical goals. If you're curious, I think I've read this year so far 77, maybe 78 books. Majority of them were classics. That's if you know, interested in that sort of statistics, just so you can assess whether it's worth for you subscribing. But from a personal perspective, I don't look ever at my reading goals in terms of the numbers. And as I've mentioned, I'll probably continue with the classics. I'll be reading loads more sagas. And also I plan to reintroduce some memoirs into my reading. Other than that, I'm very relaxed, and actually I'm quite happy that I managed to read my top, or I will have managed, because I haven't quite done that yet, read my top 5 classics and top 5 contemporary fiction books in 2025. Final question is, have you already started making reading plans for next year? Again, I think I touched on this in my last question. Yes, I have. So obviously more classics, more sagas, but also the one thing I haven't mentioned yet is that having recently read Olga Tokarczuk in the original Polish language, and having recently had a very short trip to Poland, it was a very last minute trip to celebrate my parents' 50th wedding anniversary. I wanted to pick up more Polish classics, and I did, and that may be like a whole separate video. I don't know, let me know if you're interested. But I've picked up some modern and some older Polish classics, all of which have been translated into English, and I'm very excited about rediscovering Polish literature, which obviously some of those books I have been forced to read at school, so it'll be interesting to see it from a very different perspective. That is a part of my plan for next year that I have not mentioned yet, I guess. And then the other part of the plan is to continue reading the most favorite writers that I have discovered this year. So that is Steinbeck, Josephine, Daphne de Maurier for sure. I mean, I'm even very tempted to reach for Rebecca before the end of the year, because that's the only second book I have. Oh, you can't see it because it's on my higher shelf, but it's just sitting there very nicely on display. I also want to read The Glass Blowers by her and The Jamaica Inn. She's written loads of books, so I have loads to read by her. And another author that I have discovered most recently is Bernard Schlink. I talked about his book Olga in my September reading wrap-up, I think. I absolutely loved that book, and I loved his writing. And I have this library copy of The Granddaughter, which is my next book by Bernard Schlink, but I'll be reading the reader and probably everything else that he has written. So that's it. That's my little check-in. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know what you are reading or planning to read before the end of December. Is there any special book that you look forward to the most to transition you into the winter season? Just like I love watching other booktubers videos about this topic, I would love to hear from you as well. Thank you so much. As always, I'll see you next Friday. Bye for now.